The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
Brightest lights of the NHL's future. The talented 20-somethings of the Western Conference to shoot it out with these living, breathing, over 35 icons, the future Hall of Famers of the East.
It's kind of like we're the X-Files, and they're lost in space.
Or in Trekkie terms, it's the original cast against the next generation in an all-star game. It's a fast world. It's a fast game.
So don't blink.
Welcome, Giles and the Goalie Podcast, All-Star 2018 edition of the Giles and the Goalie Podcast. I am your host, Giles Farrell. Across from me is Ben Remington.
Hello.
And Ben, we have quite a show lined up for our listeners, so we won't try to keep them too long, but your thoughts on our cast of characters we're about to unleash on our two listeners.
Well, I hope it's at least more entertaining than the actual NHL All-Star game.
That's not hard to beat.
Yeah, so we got a pretty low bar to clear there, so I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah. So it'll probably run longer than our usual podcasts do, but with the star power we have lined up, we hope you'll trudge along here and listen. We got 5 guests for you, and they all are going to answer the same 5 questions, and they all actually were really great. We had a variety of answers, so that's really fun, and we hope you all enjoy it.
Word.
So before we dive into that, we'll just quick run over the 5 questions here. Listeners can probably figure out what Ben and I are already thinking on the particular question, so we won't keep you too long, so we'll just kind of quick run over. First question we throw to the listeners as we kind of, not the listeners, the guests, we let them talk about their thoughts on the Wild season in general. Obviously everyone is underwhelmed, as are we. Second question is the player I'm most impressed with on the Wild this season. And we really got a mixed bag of answers on that, which was nice. Same for the next question was, on the flip side, player you're most disappointed with. And then we had a Eric Stahl kind of general question, or an Eric Stahl story. Obviously not everyone is able to give an Eric Stahl story because, well, they're not often in the room. And then our last question is, what change would you make to the NHL All-Star Game, which is my favorite out of the lot because it needs to get tinkered with at some point. So it's interesting to hear the various answers.
Yeah, and I think with the Wild questions, it's good because it kind of gives you an idea as to, I don't want to say optimistic or pessimistic, but at least what level of pessimism that we're dealing with here.
Right.
And kind of give you an idea as to, I think there's still a fair amount of people that think the Wilds can still make the playoffs, and it's, a little bit more of a long shot now than a lot of people would like to admit, but I think their answers there will give you an idea as to where they're at on that front, or if they're, the type that's not planning for any playoff hockey here in 2018.
So yeah, those were the questions we threw out to our guests. And since we have 5 guests to get through, we're going to just go through them one by one. Then there'll be a little transitional in between each person to kind of let you know, hey, we're switching guests here. So if you need to take a potty break, you can certainly hit the pause button there, or listen while you're on a potty break. I don't care how you listen to podcasts. So without further ado, we will lead it off with the master producer from last week's show, Tom Schreier.
Apologies.
All right, leading off the Giles and the Goalie podcast All-Star Show is the Commander-in-Chief of ZoneCoverage.com. That is Tom Schreier. Tom, how's it going?
I'm feeling special. You'll be hitting lead off. It's a tough position to be in.
Yeah, don't set the podcast on fire too much with your takes here, because people need to listen further along here.
I got some protection behind me in the lineup. I know if I flail at one pitch outside the zone or something, we'll be fine.
Yeah. No, I guess I can't say too much because you have to let us into the studios when we so need to use them.
Frankly, I'm actually happy with this development. I know you guys are upset about it, but this means I can come on a podcast more, dish out some hot takes about our lukewarm hockey team here in the Twin Cities.
Speaking of the lukewarm hockey team, they are at the All-Star break this weekend. And Tom, what are your thoughts on the Wild as we record?
You know, I like that Russo went after the away stuff. I mean, I know that Pittsburgh's a tough place to play. Geez, did they look overmatched? I know you don't want the latest game to kind of overwhelm your perception of the team, but you know, the fact is, I can't remember the last time they played like more than 40 or 45 minutes a game. And when they do, they look great. I understand that there's been injuries, and in some ways, the fact that you can kind of keep pace is impressive, given that none of those guys who went out were scrubs. You know, these are the Niederreiters, Coils, obviously Parisi with his back and all that of the world that are good players, but they still don't have a pure goal scorer. It's a mediocre league. I know people like to use parity. Parity to me implies that it's a whole bunch of skilled teams that are well run, and that, you know, I mean, it's what the NBA would be without the Warriors, basically. But, you know, to me, it just seems like a league that's restrained by caps, and the GMs really don't have much wiggle room, and even the good GMs are going to, unfortunately, oversee kind of poor teams. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing impressive about it. It seems kind of stale. I mean, it doesn't mean if you have a ticket, you could see a win. I think on any given night, they can probably beat any given team. But at the same time, I mean, you can just tell when they're not engaged. And, you know, I mean, I should have the schedule in front of me, but you can go over however many losses, and you're like, yeah, it's just a team they probably didn't take too seriously. And so, I don't know. I mean, I think it's unfortunate. I don't know how upset fans get about this. I know in, like, football, you often talk about you have a 45-minute team, you have a 50-minute team, 55, and then the complete teams that played, you know, the whole game. I mean, it's not a good sign when the Wild really are not playing all three periods. And thank God Bruce Boudreau calls him out on it, and thank God, you know, it ends up in the papers with, you know, McClellan and Russo and all those guys that, you know, it's an open secret. I mean, people know what's going on with the team, and it's kind of a bummer to watch night in, night out.
So since you're so high on the Wild at the All-Star break here, do you have a player that has stood out in a positive way to you this season?
I mean, the easy one's Eric Stahl, but that guy, literally, I mean, I think Russo said something on his podcast about him living in this palatial estate in Thunder Bay. That might be fake news. He might be just coming out of the woods. I mean, that guy is a man in every sense of the word. Whenever I see him standing next to Gorg, and Gorg's not like a small dude by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm like, good God, this guy looks like he's just, you know, something else. And he's, you know, I'm shocked he's playing this well. I thought that injury at the end of last year, I mean, I was worried just kind of bigger picture things, like just what that did to his head. It just looked awful. You know, it's one of those things that happens in hockey every once in a while, and it's unfortunate, but he's certainly bounced back. I also just think generally, and this is a really bad way to answer this question, but I think the defensive core is actually pretty good. I think that's kind of probably what's kept things from really unraveling at times. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like as much as we focus on the forwards, the lack of the goal scorer, I mean, just what Parisi can offer at this stage in his career, inconsistency of Coyle, Niederreiter's defense, just kind of some issues with, you know, Granlund, you go down the line, Zucker sometimes not finishing when you think he's got the goalie on a string. I mean, the defensive core, and you and Ben would know this better than me and probably could pick it apart more, but just seems solid on a nightly basis. And so I feel like that should be pointed out as much as, I'm always negative. I think that's actually, again, you can pick these guys apart, but I think it's much more solid. And I think the problem is when the goaltending, when the bottom falls out occasionally there, or these issues with the forwards overwhelm, or kind of the focus on the defensive core as a whole.
It's really weird, like, you think about it, and I think even Russo pointed this out on his podcast, like you mentioned. Since the Wild got Nate Prosser back, the defense has been very, very good. And, it's not like Nate Prosser is a world beater. He's a 6th, 7th defenseman at best. He doesn't drive puck possession, but it just looks like these guys are way more comfortable out there since his return, and I don't know. It's such a weird situation, but I guess I can't complain because they've been playing so much better.
Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, he's an incredibly likable guy. I mean, the limited, it was one season that we'd access. He seemed like a good dude. I've even seen him at the Liffey, obviously that Irish bar on West 7th, just like hanging out with, I was assuming, his buddies after games and stuff. I mean, I think, if you're going to be that guy, you probably have to bring something in terms of locker room presence. The other thing, too, is it seems hockey's weird where there's such a gap, for example, between like the G League and the NBA or AAA baseball and the major leagues or whatever. And it's funny that the gap between the AHL and the NHL has to be relatively significant, but those guys, seem to be able to kind of come up and play. And so I would say, if you want to call him like the equivalent of like a quad A baseball player, meaning a guy who like thrives in AAA but isn't going to ever be like a world beater in the majors, he is still a step above like the Kyle Quincy's of the world. And I never thought that would make that big of a difference, but maybe that's just rounding out what's otherwise a solid core. And I mean, in some ways, these, you just can't have that many leaks. And maybe they just plugged one, and that made all the difference. Who knows?
An otherwise fine defensive core.
An otherwise defined defensive core, exactly.
So, Tom, on the flip side of the player who has most impressed you, is there a player you are most disappointed in this season?
That's a good question. I mean, two come to mind, and one I think may be coaching related, although both Boudreau and Yo have done the same thing with him. But with Charlie Coyle, I like him at his best. I like having that physical guy, that big presence in front of the net. He seems like a good dude. Like, he to me, I don't know if he's in the long-term plans, Russo keeps suggesting, and I think this may be just based on analysis rather than in the know, but we know he's in the know, and that probably influences analysis. That Coyle may be that guy that you flip to see if you can get something. But, I mean, I love him when he's on, and the problem is it's so obvious when he's off. And it just doesn't seem like someone that's getting better with age or more comfortable with the system or whatever. It's not like this guy's been dealt around the league and has to learn it all from scratch. I mean, I know there's a coaching change, but he's been with the Wild, since coming over in that trade and basically his whole career. And that disappoints me. And then with Niederreiter, I always, again, it's a standard thing, but I really think he's the only guy that could become that goal scorer internally. I mean, I know people like Granlund, but I do worry about kind of size limitations and stuff like that. I don't know. Niederreiter's defense must be really bad if he's got the leash he had. I know Yo definitely had a short one, and it's not. It's probably changed with Boudreau, but it doesn't change as much as I think. Like Yo was that puck possession. By the numbers, I mean, the guy was brilliant, and he really focused on defense. I always kind of wondered if that would hinder the development of players, though, kind of like Niederreiter, who's basically out there to put the puck in the back of the net. But Boudreau, who's kind of gone against the grain, you think of him as the old school hockey guy that was in slap shot and, that minor leaguer that played for the Saints, the Fighting Saints and all that, and it flies in the face of kind of the metrics. He's not, I mean, maybe I'm wrong with this. I don't think he's just unleashed him, but I really would like to see Niederreiter become a guy who just demands ice time because he's the go-to guy with scoring, and we know that if a player's good enough, sometimes the defensive deficiencies go by the wayside, or coaches kind of ignore them, knowing that at the end of the day, I mean, some of the best defense is just making sure the puck's in your zone and ultimately in the back of the opponent's net. So, I don't know. I mean, those are the two guys that kind of stand out to me.
So you mentioned Eric Stahl earlier as your player you're most impressed with. He is the Minnesota Wild All-Star Game representative this weekend. And as we'll get into here with other guests, like one, I'm just amazed that after going through a severe concussion that he suffered in the end of the playoffs last year, he has returned symptom-free, and really you can't find a better contract in the NHL than what the Wild have with Eric Stahl.
Yeah, at the time of the signing, I remember talking about it and just being like, it's fine. I mean, he was, third overall, I think, in this draft class, and certainly in Carolina seemed kind of like the guy. Remind me, he was traded to New York or something? He bounced around a little bit, right? There was some uncertainty of, like, how much he really could contribute. I mean, this happens with Fletcher as much as he'll just kind of biff sometimes. Cam Barker comes to mind or whatever, but he'll find these guys. I mean, he'll either kind of extract Niederreiter out of the Islanders system, or he'll go Devin Dubnyk famously. But yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant contract. It's what you need when the salary cap's so tight and not going up. I mean, the biggest thing, and of course I'm going to get myself in trouble with half the fan base basically, but if you're telling me you could have Stahl or Koivu, and it seems like it kind of sort of comes down to that. I mean, if you add up all these numbers and stuff, I mean, Stahl's the guy you want. I still wonder, he's 33, right? Something like that?
Yep.
It's funny, athletes hit a wall around that age, so the fact that he hasn't, especially after this big injury, would tell me that he's, given his skill level and just that, obviously, some of these guys are exceptions to the rule, he can kind of plow through his early to mid-30s. I mean, Matt Cullen seems to defy age, right? They're calling him Dad, right, in Pittsburgh. I mean, that's hilarious, right? He's got maybe a little salt and pepper going and stuff in the beard, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the bigger question for him is just I love his play and stuff like that, but just does all this add up? The physicality of the game, the big injury at the end of the year. I mean, does it all kind of add up? And outside of that, I mean, I couldn't be more impressed. Quick question for you: would Suter be in the conversation? Obviously, he didn't make it, but is he having a down year? Or sometimes with defensemen, I just don't know. Just given that a lot of what they do, if they're doing it well, it's like a long snapper. You just don't notice it.
I mean, he's all right. Like, I don't think he's doing anything great, but it was kind of speculated that he might have been the Wild's All-Star representative because the forwards in the Central Division are insanely stacked, and it's just the easy pick for everyone to just go, oh, Suter, he gets Norris votes every year, and I never understand why. It's name recognition at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, that's so much of All-Star in every sport. That's not just a hockey thing. Is you get on your reputation, and we found out too, it's not just fans. Coaches tend to be a little more deliberate, media tends to be a little bit more deliberate, but among players themselves. And I mean, part of it probably is that they go into the rink every night, and likely the Wild's opponents go, Stahl's on a roll here, and Suter's going to be tough to play against. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, they seem kind of the same, cut from the same cloth, where Suter's the same thing. He just seems like a physical menace, right? And there's just something else, about the way he's built, and that he's kind of designed to be that guy to play like Nick Lidstrom, where he may walk away from the game in his, late 30s, 40s, whatever, and you kind of go, man, he could probably play. He just, at some point doesn't want to deal with the aches and pains and all the stuff that players don't like, right? They like playing the game. They don't like a lot of the other aspects of it, outside of the lifestyle, of course. But, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we just learned that there's guys like Granlund's, who his size and his build that can succeed in the NHL, but it's definitely a leg up if you have kind of that size and know how to use it.
And last question: if you were appointed commissioner of the NHL and were allowed to make a change to the NHL All-Star Game, what would you make to said game?
I'll start with this. I think the All-Star Game is the least of their concerns. I think there's a lot of other things, and you and Ben obviously go over this almost on a weekly basis that you could change. hard for me to say. I truly believe that All-Star games in general I'm kind of meh on. I feel like it's more the honor, and that at the end of the career you can kind of tell who a guy was if you were this many time All-Stars, or there's kind of the proverbial underrated dark horse guy, right? Where you're like, how did that person not get more rewards? In terms of how to change it, I mean, I always feel like the NHL should promote its stars more. Baseball has the same issue. The NBA and NFL do a really good job of making their guys that must-watch TV. And I know it's a little issue. It's an issue with baseball because you only get up to bat a couple times, and with hockey you only play basically a third of the game. Just kind of more focus. Stop tinkering with that. I understand. Look, the NBA adopted the model of kind of pick your team or whatever, so that certainly seems to work. But maybe stop tinkering with the game itself and just find ways to create good exposure for your players, and really just emphasize that whether it's internal media there, doing stuff for the NHL Network or NHL.com or whatever, or externally, just hockey players are fun, fascinating people. They tend to come from small Canadian towns. They're certainly committed to the game where you go live with a billet family, when you're 15 or 16 or whatever. Generally very personable. I mean, just capitalize on that more. I wish I had a better concrete idea. I mean, that's something that you probably should have a board of people come up with who understand media and understand kind of stardom. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like even casual fans should just know more about the players and kind of their quirks, especially goalies, their quirks and where they came from and their stories, because they're fun to tell, and I feel like they're just not well told outside of people know their local guys well, but Crosby and Ovechkin, right? But Eric Stahl, for example, make sure you make a big deal out of this Stahl family and stuff, and kind of do what Russo did here with the Athletic, essentially for a local crowd. I know Athletic now is a little more national, but do some more features or have those guys sit down for a round table or whatever. There's ways to tell that story, and I think that is way more important than the stupid game they play that's meaningless. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
Well, before we let you go here, Tom, is there anything you want to plug, or where can people find you on the old Twitter machine?
Yeah, at tschreier3. It's SCHREIER. It's all the vowels. Definitely check out zonecoverage.com. You guys have done a good job. Heather broke down that trade. You kind of talked about the Wild underperforming and then kind of asking if they've turned the corner. Ben took a unique angle. He obviously has his the interviews he does, and then a unique angle saying, should the Iowa Wild have a different name and kind of rebrand and become their own entity? So definitely check out zonecoverage.com, and just, I'm going to pat myself on the back. There was no hot takes, none of that craziness. I didn't barely brought up a former coach. I've been good, Giles. I was a good leadoff hitter.
You did good. Until the end when you patted yourself on the back.
I mean, I went there, I took some pitches. Everyone knows what the MO on the pitcher is now, and yeah, hopefully teed it up for these all-star cast of guests you got on the show today.
Yeah, no, it should be fun, and I'm sure in the very near future we will have you back on the podcast again when we need to check into the studio.
Yeah. At this point, I mean, this is a hostile takeover. I've put myself in a position. You gotta put me on now.
Oh boy. Well, Tom, thanks for jumping on with us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, sounds good.
Because we are ducks, and ducks fly together.
Alrighty, and joining us as a part of this All-Star Weekend celebration, one of the All-Stars of the Zone Coverage hockey coverage team, the pro of the team, which is pretty easy to say, pretty definite title there. Joined by Heather Rule today. How's it going, Heather?
Pretty good. How are you?
Not bad. It's
enjoying our festivities so far?
I haven't. I didn't watch the skills competition last night, which is the only thing that's even borderline watchable as far as the NHL All-Star Weekend goes. So I don't know. I might watch a replay of that at some point, but I don't really plan on watching the All-Star game today. I've got plans with friends and such, so I'm gonna miss it. Shucks.
Yeah, same here. I I only saw a couple highlights on social media, and so I think we saw the beginning, maybe just kind of the intros of the players, and that was kind of it. I'm kind of using this as, hey, there's a few days off for the Wild, so take a little break from writing the gamers and stuff, especially after the last one, which is pretty bad and Wild. So yeah, I probably won't watch the game today either. If I do, it'll be on in the background like usual when I'm doing other stuff. So
yeah, I think we, for those of us who write about the team, and you probably a lot more than I do, it just it's probably a good time to take a little break like the players do. So take full advantage.
Oh yeah, definitely.
All right, so we'll hop into the questions here. We're asking the same 5 questions of all of the All-Star panelists on this All-Star episode. Rather than, talking to our various friends at the Twins Daily Winter Meltdown, we decided to have an honest-to-goodness recording and just kind of smash together later. So a lot less background noise, a lot less drinking, probably a little more professional.
Well, that's not as fun, then, is it?
Oh, trust me, there was plenty of drinking at the Twins Daily Winter Meltdown. I don't know if those who saw Giles and I recap the game that night know that there was plenty of drinking. All right, so question 1, and we won't dive into the over-unders that you're probably dominating on, that we laid down in the season with the zone coverage hockey team, but just your general thoughts on the Wild season so far. Certainly disappointing, but how disappointing to you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. The last kind of column piece I wrote was, just kind of saying, hey, I don't think they're making the playoffs this year, and it's kind of been that letdown that I think I was worried about, but I didn't know to what extent. Because you come off of last year where you have this great year, and all these guys had individually, some career years and everything, and then you look at this year and you just see so many things that are really disappointing. You see, Mikko Koivu's got 6 goals. Charlie Coyle, I think, has 4 goals, and he was hurt early on a little bit. Chris Stewart has 8 goals. I mean, that should tell you something right there about where the team is at and how many guys have less goals than Chris Stewart. Not to take anything away from him as a veteran player. But
oh, no, you totally can. That's fine.
Not one of the guys that you want as, not a leading scorer, but,
right.
You have all these things that are below him. So I think it's been disappointing to see just kind of the up and down flow of the season, too. You have, they haven't really gone on any kind of a run either way, too much. They haven't gone on, you have little streaks here and there, but it hasn't been like, oh, they've been on some 8-game losing streak swoon yet. There's still time for that. But, they haven't gone on some big winning streak either. They'll have maybe a couple games and they'll lose a couple and, they'll go on the road and lose. But then they'll come back home and play well again. And it's just kind of been a lot more up and down than I think I was expecting.
Right.
And then just with the competition in the division, it's just so difficult to kind of make up that ground and keep pace when you're not really, you're kind of, especially the first couple months, you're sort of just hovering around that 500 mark. That's just not going to cut it in the division.
Yeah, I think that, it's just kind of a Murphy's Law kind of thing right now for the Wild because they're not having a great season. And while that's obvious, it's a terrible season to not have a good season because the Central is unbelievable right now. Even the Colorado Avalanche reeled off 9 wins straight. I don't know how that's even possible. Exactly. So, yeah, it really has been disappointing and just kind of catching to the wrong time. And that's how good teams miss the playoffs. I think this Wild hockey team is a good team. I think there's plenty of talent there. But when you have a down season mixed with the rest of your division really being on the upswing, that's how teams that have enough talent to make the playoffs miss the playoffs. And it happens all the time. So that's just kind of what it's looking like. Going on to that with more of a positive note, What's a player on the Wild that you have been most impressed with this season?
That's a good question. I have to pick one. Well, it's probably the obvious answer, but I think it has to be Eric Stahl.
Sure.
Because, I mean, it's the obvious answer. It's their all-star, but just, as I was kind of looking back at the last column I had written too, just, where would they be without him and a lot of his offensive production?
Right.
He, other than kind of just very early on where Chris Stewart, I think, was leading the team in goals since he scored a few right away. But other than that, it's been Eric Stahl as, the leader in points, the leader in goals. And, he was someone that came in and people were kind of worried about it because figured, okay, he's this veteran player. He's been around. He's kind of going to be on the downswing. And I think he's really stepped up and kind of filled that, well, I guess leadership void. I don't mean that in necessarily a leadership in the dressing room kind of sense, just leadership as in production on the ice. For sure. He's been able to do that. And I think that's been important because you've had, Parise's been out basically the whole year and, other guys that aren't putting the puck in the net like they used to.
Right.
So I think that's been good to see that you do have at least one guy who's been able to get it done on the ice. And, he has 20 goals now this season, which is, I think fans would have definitely taken that, a couple years ago when they signed him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and so it just makes each passing year with him kind of makes that contract look better and better. So you can certainly count the missteps from Chuck Fletcher on both hands and feet, but that contract was not one of them. So on the flip side of that, I think it's a pretty long list. Who is the player that you have been least impressed with? Who's most disappointing for you so far?
I think I'm going to go with Charlie Coyle on that one.
Sure.
He's kind of honestly turned into a little bit of a Vanek type player for me when I'm watching. Not necessarily even his, I guess I haven't dug into all the similarities between how they played or, whatever, but just the fact of I'm watching him and it just, God, do something. He's, to me, he's never seemed to be able to use his size to much of an advantage.
Yeah. Yep.
As in, what? Get in there, clear some guys out in front of the net. Go finish your checks. And not that he has to turn into some huge physical player and be the guy that starts fights and everything, but,
right.
It just doesn't seem like he's willing to do that. And you just kind of look at him. It's like, where is that presence on the ice from him? And, especially with his offensive numbers, too. I just feel like, how many years can keep going by where he's supposed to be, he was kind of touted as this great player and he's going to be really good. And, he has 4 goals this year. I mean, that's not getting it done.
Right.
And, I don't know what the deal is there. If there's some, the mental side of the game is kind of getting to him or, I don't know. It just seems like a lot of times I'm watching him and I'm like, okay, come on, get,
right.
do something,
Yeah.
Get out there and kind of bring a spark to the team or, I don't know. It's just, it's been disappointing to kind of watch, season after season to hope that he's going to kind of raise the level of his game and to not see that happen is disappointing.
Yeah, it kind of, brings me to the point, and this is very revisionist history, but, how much better off would this Wild team be if they would have jettisoned Coyle in the expansion draft and kept Eric Haula and a guy who's very similar to Coyle, but uses his big size well in Alex Tuck. I mean, there's a lot of comparisons between Tuck and Coyle, and I think Tuck, as you were kind of saying about Coyle, I think Tuck uses his size well. He gets in front of the net. He's not the grittiest player on the ice. He's not a Chris Stewart or a Marcus Foligno out there, but he uses his size well in front of the net, and he also has some skill to go with it, as does Coyle. But it seems like it would be a very different season for the Wild and probably for the Vegas Golden Knights had they jettisoned Coyle in as opposed to getting rid of Haula and Tuck. But obviously revisionist at this point. I mean, nobody would have said that this summer, and you would have been an idiot for saying get rid of Charlie Coyle this summer. So that kind of goes hand in hand with how disappointing he's been this season.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point.
Yeah. So going back to a player that you talked about before being a big one, Eric Stahl being the lone All-Star for the Wild. Do you happen to have an Eric Stahl story at all? Have you had any interactions with Eric Stahl by chance?
No, I don't have anything there.
Is it because because you spend so much time in the locker room, or?
Well, I'm there all the time. So,
so a different path on that. Then, what was your honest to goodness reaction when the Wild signed Stahl? Were you big on that move? Were you down on that move? Were you kind of in a wait and see kind of thought on when they signed him?
I think I was maybe a little bit wait and see.
Sure.
I think when I first heard about it, I was pretty pessimistic, and I think I just kind of get used to some of these signings that happen where it's here's a veteran guy, and his numbers have decreased the past year, or he's had an injury issue or something, and then your team picks him up. It's like, oh, okay, so what are we really expecting here? You don't expect much. And so I think I was, kind of on that way, but I figured, well, kind of wait and see what happens, I guess, I don't know. I definitely wasn't super positive when that happened. And so, which is why I think, it's been, all the better to see what he's done this season and to kind of realize that, okay, things can work out, sometimes.
Yeah, I think it is the least wild thing ever for an aging, declining veteran player to wildly exceed expectations.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And you have all of these, you have, I already mentioned them, you have Thomas Vanek and these other guys that have come in. It's like, okay, well, this is just going to be another one of those, and so that's kind of what you're expecting. And then if it goes the other way and goes positive, hey, it's just kind of a bonus because you're expecting, worse things. So yeah,
Stahl is so anti-Wild, they'll probably just trade him soon. So final question here. It is All-Star Weekend, and we talked about how little we enjoy the All-Star Game. With that in mind, what is the one change you would make to the All-Star Game to either make it, more watchable for fans or more of a special event? What's the one change you would do? Something they could go back to or something new they could try?
Well, I think... they already have tried to make some really significant changes to it, which I think is probably a good thing for those that aren't going to watch it because, I've talked in the past how I don't think there should really be all-star games at all. Baseball is all right, but you can name a team if you want, and then have some special, have a fun weekend or like a special ceremony, or something if you want to do that, but it just... the games are just so ridiculous and over the top. I guess I don't know what I would specifically change. Maybe not even having a game at all.
That's a very fair change.
Maybe just putting, the skills competition, maybe just having that and having the guys, kind of like with baseball with the home run derby, all the players are out there watching and, they're on their smartphones, taking videos and having fun. And, so maybe something like that, just kind of really just have the laid back casual, just have guys kind of show off their skills. And, if you want to put some kind of point system on that as far as like who would, if you want to have like a team win or something, if you wanted to do that, and
give them home ice advantage in the Stanley Cup playoff.
Oh yeah, that would. And about right for the NHL if they wanted to do something like that. So, they make such good decisions anyway.
Right. Yeah. I think that's fair. I don't know if I want to go as far as to say abolish the NHL All-Star Game, but yeah, to your point, I don't ever watch it, and I think the only moment that I remember from it was the whole John Scott saga from a couple of years ago. Other than that, I watched All-Star games in the 90s with Gretzky, with Lemieux, Patrick Waugh, Dominik Hasek, Brian Leach, all the stars, and I don't remember a single thing from them. I remember watching them, but it doesn't produce very memorable moments like MLB has managed to on occasion. It just hasn't really done that. So there's probably some revamping to be done there, and the NHL will probably screw it up somehow, some way. So that's all kind of a sin.
Outdoors, maybe they could do that.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well, if you cut back on all of these Stadium Series games and maybe even finally give up on the Winter Classic going up against the best bowl games of the year, that might be the niche that you go for. I mean, the All-Star game is the only outdoor game all season long. That would probably put some eyeballs to it.
Yeah, that might. Yeah, just kind of throw back to what the original Winter Classic was when it was, cool, when it was just the only outdoor game. And,
right. And I know they already did the whole picking teams thing, but do it truly old school. Throw everyone's stick at center ice, and just throw the sticks on each side.
That's a good idea,
See
too.
what you come up with. No reading sticks, though. All right, so thank you very much, Heather, for joining me today. It should be a great compliment to the other All-Stars that we have. A true pro journalist on our zone coverage team. Hopefully, you're enjoying this mini break off that is the NHL All-Star break, and we look forward to your excellent coverage here at Zone Coverage. Pumping out those gamers and pumping out those previews and the occasional column. So look forward to that. Anything else you're up to that you'd like to plug quick?
No, not really. It's a little bit of a lull before state tournaments and stuff start to pop up. On the high school side, and so just kind of watching the Wild games and some Gopher basketball, and just kind of keeping up things until the section and state tournaments start to take shape in February, March.
Yeah, so definitely follow Heather at HL Rule on the Twitter. She writes everywhere and everything. Lots of quality work for Zone Coverage, The Athletic, the local newspapers, local magazines, all that kind of stuff. So definitely check it out. Thanks, Heather, for joining me, and we will talk to you later.
Yep, thanks so much.
It's not Team USA. Oh, yes, it is. They've got on new uniforms. They're wearing the logo of the Duck. I've never seen this before.
Next up on the Giles and the Goalie podcast All-Star Show, joining us from the Athletic, Minnesota, where he writes about all the stats, is Derek, otherwise known as @StateOfStats on Twitter. Derek, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Giles. Thanks for having me.
We are glad to have you back. It's a little bit overdue. We do owe you a solo guest appearance on this podcast after your first one where we couldn't hear you at all, and we had to do the Lord's work on trying to get you clearer in editing. So
I would have been more surprised if the audio had been clearer.
What's funny is I remember it so well still. The first thing I asked you on that show, because I kept having to go back and edit it over and over, was you came from the Vikings game that day. And This is topical right now because I asked you how'd the Vikings do, and the first thing you said to me was, Case Keenum looks good. Would you like to make a retraction on that statement?
No, I thought he played just fine this year. Obviously didn't end the way that any of us Vikings fans wanted, but yeah, I'm not going to be the one that's going to give you like some hot quarterback take for the offseason, though. I think there's people that are more educated than me that need to make that decision.
I have to twist the knife for Vikings fans in Ben's absence here, so I had to go for that that quick jab. But I know. So, Derek, before we dive into it, how are things going at the Athletic? Obviously, you're getting a couple articles out, or maybe just one or two articles out a week still.
Yeah. I try to do one a week. Last week was kind of like my off week as well as the Wild, just because we had so much Hockey Day Minnesota stuff going on, and there was all this buzz with the Vikings. So I took the week off last week, but I should have something up this weekend, and we got a lot of great hockey coverage going on over there right now. We've got people covering. We've got like 3 or 4 Wild writers now. We've got college hockey writers. It's really cool. We got a guy that Evan Sporer does video breakdowns now. I do the analytics stuff. Russo obviously does the more traditional stuff, and then Jesse Pierce does the occasional piece as well. So we got a pretty decent group over there.
Yeah, actually, we'll have Jesse on here in a little bit on this podcast as well.
Awesome.
But diving right into it here are questions for all of our guests. The first of which is, Derek, what are your thoughts on the Wild so far this season?
I think obviously it's not what probably most people were expecting coming from last year, myself included. I think when I was on your podcast, I said there was no reason that the Wild could compete for potentially winning the Central, and I think that's a little bit out of the question now. But I still think it's definitely possible they could get into the top three. I mean, the Central is so stacked right now. More so than I thought. That I thought probably most people were going to think going into this year. Like Colorado has completely turned around. Winnipeg is better than expected. Dallas, I still am not sold on. I think they're going to come down a little bit. I still don't think they have goaltending that's going to last. But yeah, obviously it didn't start the way we wanted it all to, but I think right now they're playing super, super good. I mean, the way that they're defending right now, I just looked it up again today, and they are tied with Dallas for expected goals against per 60 at 5-on-5, and anytime you're in that top group in that category, it says a lot about the way that you're playing. We just need the offense to show up now, and I think they could definitely make a run and probably be competing for sure a wild card spot, and if not potentially a third spot in the Central.
Yeah, you mentioned how stacked the Central is, and the Wild, the playoffs that started today. We're recording here on Wednesday. They had started today. The Wild would be on the outside looking in, as Colorado tied with them would own the tiebreaker. And I didn't think either you and I, when we did that podcast before the season, thought that those were words we would be uttering here in January either.
No, definitely not, and especially not the way that they've been doing it. I mean, they've been crushing people. I mean, they're on this 10-game win streak where they've trailed for less than 90 seconds. So it's crazy.
I mean, I guess it is nice to give a head coach an entire summer, not just 90 minutes to prepare for a regular season like the Avs did. So good for them, I guess, or not. I don't know why I said that. But
definitely not good for them.
Next question we have is, as the Wild here over their halfway point in the season at the All-Star break, which player have you been most impressed with here on the Wild roster?
I think I would have to say Mikhail Granlund. I think coming into the season after having his career year last year and getting that big new contract, that I think there was a ton of pressure on him, and we didn't know whether he'd be able to reproduce what he did last year. And I think he's proven that he's the best forward on this team, maybe except for Eric Staal. I think the conversation between the best forward is between those two, and I don't think you would really have to argue that hard to win somebody over in saying that it was Granlund. So just the plays that he can make is unbelievable. He has a great shot. I mean, he's a really, really good hockey player. So I definitely have to go with Granlund. He amazes me every night. Whenever I get to see him in person, it's so awesome, because watching a player with that skill level in person is it's really special.
Yeah, I think we all thought that there'd be a little bit of regression on his part coming into the season. He had those 69 points last year, and had it not been for that injury early on in the season, he might have been able to maybe hit that mark again. But
for sure,
I guess we'll see what happens. And then on the flip side of that, which player on the Wild roster have you been most disappointed with this season?
I think I'm going to go with Marcus Foligno, just because of the trade and the contract. I just think when that contract got signed, I think I'm on record. I think it was the Hockey Wilderness podcast. And I just said, it's more years than I was expecting, but the dollar is okay. And I totally think both of those things are out the window now. I think he's way overpaid, and 3 more years after this season seems like an eternity. And there's been multiple times when I've been watching him in person at the X, and he'll just throw a puck away. Like, I'll just watch him for an entire shift, and then he'll just be kind of like gliding around. He's like throwing pucks away, can't make a pass, but he can fight, I guess, kind of. So I have not been impressed with him whatsoever at all. I mean, Tyler Ennis at least shows like his flashes of skill if we're talking about players that they traded for this offseason, but I don't see what Marcus Foligno brings to the table that almost any other third or fourth liner can't do.
Right. It's just like you feel like there could be some skilled guys in Iowa that can't get up here because of
yeah, Luke Cunnin to name one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really unfortunate that he's taking roster spots away from guys like that.
And what was weird is I think even in like maybe mid-November, I was still saying I'm fine with Foligno. Like Ennis was the one I was more worried about, and now here we are in mid-January, and Foligno has completely kind of lost that thought in my head where
it's been like a bad fall off too. I think it was the game. I can't remember who it was against, but I remember I was at the game when it was the first game that he got scratched, and it just seemed like after that, like he wasn't by any means like good before that, but he wasn't. I mean, he was serviceable, and after that, it was just like he's been. You can't even find him every night. Like you'd be shocked if somebody told you that he had actually played.
All right. The Eric Stahl is the Minnesota Wild All-Star representative this weekend, and I guess what are your thoughts on Eric Stahl here in his second season with the Wild, and just from a cap standpoint, is there really a better contract in the NHL right now than what the Wild are getting out of Eric Stahl?
I really don't think there is. I can't say I've looked at it incredibly closely, but to get a guy on that small of a contract that's producing like close to 60 points a year, I mean that's pretty incredible. Yeah, I can't really say enough about how well Eric Stahl has fit into this team. It's the couple years leading up to the Wild getting Eric Stahl, everybody just complained about how the Wild didn't really have a number one center. They didn't have a scoring threat at center, and then it just seemed like Eric Stahl came in and filled that role perfectly. I mean, you see him on lines like his line when he's with Parise and Nino or Coyle and Nino, and I mean they're a force out there. Just the way that he moves with the puck and he protects it so well. His shot is obviously all-star class, elite level shot. I just think he's a great leadership for all the young guys around him too. And I want like every young player I want to be on that line with him. Like when he plays. He had played earlier in the season with Cunnin, I think, and I think that was awesome for Cunnin. That's when we saw Cunnin score his first points. I'm actually going to be doing a piece on Eric Stahl for this weekend, so I haven't like deep dove into his numbers quite yet. But if you stay tuned to the Athletic Minnesota, you can see more of my thoughts on Eric Stahl.
And then last question for Derek Peterson, our guest. If you could make one change to the NHL All-Star Game, what would that change be?
Oh, God. That is a really good question. I would maybe... I don't know. I really like the 3-on-3 format. I think it makes it close to about as fun as it can be. It's still kind of strange because last year I remember watching and PK Subban was just like flying around, like acting like an idiot, like he wasn't even trying, and like it kind of sucks to see a guy who has the potential of winning like a share of $1 million playing like that. So like as a person who doesn't make millions of dollars a year, that's a little frustrating to watch. But
I think if I recall correctly, they panned to the bench when PK Subban was flying around like that, and it just showed Bruce Boudreau, the coach of the Central Division team, not looking very pleased, even in an exhibition game like that.
Right, but I mean, the coach has a stake in the cash too, so I don't blame him for acting like that. Yeah, I just remember he was just like, there was a couple plays I think where he would just like slide on his stomach to like try to break up a pass for no reason or something. It was bizarre, and nobody else was acting like that. So, I don't really know what I would change. Honestly, this is a really, really hard question.
I mean, I guess if I was taking my pick, as I kind of pointed out here in our pregame here to all of our guests, where Ben and I kind of went over the questions, I pointed out that, I would change not the format, the 3-on-3, but I would just merely change the having a player from every team represented in this game, because as we're seeing, you could make an incredible team of the players who were left off the rosters this year, and it just felt like some of those spots that had to go to, Montreal, Detroit, Edmonton, Arizona. Okay, Connor McDavid's in Edmonton, so forget I said that. But, just teams in the basement felt like could have been better served to somebody else.
Oh, here's an idea maybe. What if they did like they kept it 3-on-3, but every single team from the NHL got to send like their 3 guys, and then they did like a tournament.
Ooh.
And the winner gets like $1 million or something. I think that'd be kind of cool to see the teams that everybody would make.
Big old round robin tournament, and then
yeah, that sounds pretty fun actually.
And then the Wild send Koivu, Parise, and Suter, and they lose immediately.
And that's it. They only send 3 guys. That's it. They'll play 60 minutes. They don't care.
I want to see that now, just to watch Wild Twitter meltdown. That's
it's always fun to watch them meltdown.
So, all right, Derek, before we let you go here, is there anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, the Athletic Minnesota. My next article will be out sometime this weekend, focusing on Eric Stahl, like I mentioned. There's lots of great hockey coverage happening all the time on there, though, so you don't have to wait for that. Follow me on Twitter at State of Stats, where I'm sure you'll love my sports commentary. And I think that's about all I've got.
All right, Derek, thanks for jumping on with us. And again, we'll have you back here in a little bit as a guest on one of our regular shows here to get you back on again.
Can't wait. I'll bring my own microphone.
Ooh, good luck with that. We struggle with the third microphone, so hopefully
Okay.
by then we'll have it figured out.
I was trying to help you out, but maybe not.
Yeah. Oh, all right, Derek. Thank you so much, and we'll chat with you soon.
Thanks a lot, Giles.
Great moments are born from great opportunity. And that's what you have here tonight, boys. That's what you've earned here tonight.
Joining us on the Giles and the Goalie podcast All-Star Show, one of our other favorite guests is Jesse Pierce of NHL.com and The Athletic. Jesse, how's it going today?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Glad you have made it safely to the X and back with the heavy snow as we're recording this on Tuesday. That was quite the experience at the X on Monday night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't have to deal with half the nonsense that some of those players had to deal with. It was kind of entertaining to hear some of those stories that the guys had some big issues trying to get to the rink, but everyone made it on time, and they were able to get the win against Ottawa.
Yeah, the video that I think it was Wild.com put together of all the players talking about just trying to get to the arena was fun, but I'm sure it was a little bit terrifying for them at the same time.
Yeah, I think so. I know Matt Dumba had said he called Kyle Granlund to help calm him down because he was so scared that he was running so incredibly late as far as getting to the rink. So as a couple of us had joked, I wish I had somebody like a Granlund to calm me down in situations like that, So, but yeah, no, everyone made it, and like I said, no huge issues there.
So getting into the questions that we have for all of our guests here, the first of which is, what are your thoughts here on the Wild season so far? They've been up and down. They've had injuries really hit them here until the last month, and now maybe it looks like they're finally starting to put it together.
Yeah, I mean, you said it right there. I think inconsistency was kind of the theme for this team throughout the year, and injuries certainly played a big role in that, but every team deals with that type of adversity at some point in the season. Unfortunately for the Wild, it was for the big chunk of the beginning here. But I think especially in these last 2 or 3 games, we've seen Minnesota really play a complete game. I mean, for the first time, I think they've been able to really put together a good 60 minutes of hockey, which I think was a big thing that was missing from the Wild beginning on. So I do see it as a turning point. It's just a matter of can they keep that up and keep that going. I mean, this year it's been so up and down with stringing, a couple wins and then losing a game and then winning 2 or 3 and then losing again. So if they can really turn that into a good string of 3 or 4 games even, that could be a big difference maker for them.
And then with, the inconsistencies and a lot of the players being hit with injuries early this year, has there been a player on the team that has really stuck out to you and impressed you so far this season?
Oh, that's a great question. Eric Stahl, and I kind of said that at the beginning of the year. Obviously, he's the all-star representing Minnesota, but I mean, even with Parisi and Nino and Granlund out right at the beginning, it seemed like any line that Stahl was playing on was automatically made better. I mean, the way that he can set up some of these plays and really elevate other players around him skill level, he's kind of been the one guy that I had pinned back in November as the difference maker for this team. And then Joel Eriksson has looked good the past, or especially this last game. Most recently, I think he had quite a few struggles before that, but I think it was one of his better games. Even Bruce had said that in the post-game press conference yesterday, that he's starting to finally show himself to be a pretty strong player.
And then on the flip side of that, has there been a player in the Wild this year that you would like to see a little more out of, or that's just kind of left you, wanting a little bit more this year?
Unfortunately, I got to go with Charlie Coyle. He's one of the nicest guys, and he works so hard out there, and he's just been kind of snake bitten as far as getting on the score sheet and getting some of those points. I mean, obviously, he was also one of the injured guys that were down earlier this year, but, I think there's another level of Coyle's game that for some reason he just hasn't reached yet. I think he can really get there. I mean, last year we saw him be a very strong player for this Minnesota Wild team, and it seems like he's just hasn't gotten back to that level just yet. I think it's there. He just needs to kind of find it again.
And you mentioned Eric Stahl as your player who has most impressed you this year, obviously leading the team in points. Is there an Eric Stahl story you could share with us, as he is the Wild's all-star representative this year? Or have you not had a whole lot of time with him here in his brief time in Minnesota?
I haven't had too much time, and he's just kind of a very, very serious guy, actually, too. So it's kind of hard to get a whole lot out of him. A very nice guy, and you can tell he's definitely a leader in that locker room. But I don't have any, too great of stories that I can think of right now, unfortunately.
On Stahl, you just kind of look at, what the Wild signed him for, and, really I just sit there every week and I just go, they're really getting every penny's worth out of this contract, as you don't find steals like this in the NHL anymore.
Oh, 100%. I think he was a diamond in the rough, and, I think when he was I don't want to say cast aside, but I think people assumed he was, kind of had lost a lot of the game that had made him so great. And he's been unreal, I think. And we saw a lot of that last year, too. It's not necessarily just this year. I mean, I think he was a very strong player for Minnesota last year as well. But this year, it's just, and it could have been because so many of those guys were down that you tend to notice him a little bit more, but he seems to always kind of be in the mix with these goals. I mean, he's on 4 assists in the past 3 games for a point streak, and he's a fantastic player to watch, and it's been really fun to see him help this Minnesota club.
Yeah, and I want to say he's 32 years old, and usually around that age you see players really hit the decline, and that has not been the case for him. It seems he found a whole nother gear just from switching towns, and again, that's such a good bargain for the Wild to have him here playing center.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's especially up the middle. Minnesota needed a guy like that, needed a guy to fill some of those holes, and he's been just such a huge asset for the Wild.
And then last question we have for you here. The NHL All-Star Game, obviously, this upcoming weekend in Tampa. If you were given the commissioner powers for a day and was allowed to make one change to the NHL All-Star Game, what would you make to it?
That's a really great question. I would like to see more players be able to represent some certain squads and kind of change that format up a little bit again. I think Jared Spurgeon would have been another excellent candidate for Minnesota. It's obviously tough when you can only send one. So I think that would be my big thing, because there were so many players that were overlooked, not just from Minnesota, but across the board. And if you really, truly want it to be an all-star game, I think you want to see as many all-stars as possible together. And especially with the NHL players not going to the Olympics, I mean, that's what makes the Olympics great, right? Is because you have all of these fantastic players together, and I think that would really help the All-Star game as well.
Yeah, when you have a 3-on-3 tournament like it's set up now, and your roster is limited to, I think it's 7 forwards and 3 defensemen, and you got to pick one player from each team, you're really kind of handcuffing yourself. And as we've seen this year, a lot of good players were left out.
Yes, exactly. I just think it could be so much more exciting had you not done that. So that would be my big change. And I think, like you had mentioned, hearing from fans across the board, I think that's something that would go over well too.
Jesse, before we let you go here, is there anything you'd like to plug, or where can people find you these days?
Well, you can always find me on NHL.com for every Minnesota Wild home game, along with feature stories in between on the Wild and on visiting NHL teams, a lot of Minnesota guys, all that fun stuff. Once in a while, you'll see me on the Athletic as well, and then Minnesota Hockey Journal, which comes out quarterly, along with USA Hockey Magazine. So be sure to look for me there, and I'm always on Twitter as well, Jesse_Pierce.
All right. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us, and we will definitely have you on again down the line here.
Sounds great, Jazz. Thanks so much.
Okay, guys, show us what you got.
Dave Schwartz of KARE 11, the all-around sports guy of KARE 11, joins us on our All-Star show. Dave, how's it going?
Good. I wish I could fit that on my business card. The all-around sports guy, Dave Schwartz. That would actually really be much more impressive than my actual business card, I think.
Well, I try. Maybe I can get one printed up for you. But before we jump into the hockey, Dave, you're going to cover the Olympics here next month. Are you stoked to get over there?
I really am, actually. This is in my time covering the Olympics, it's my third, and probably the one that is the least dangerous. Pyeongchang, South Korea, which is, to give you an idea, it's a couple hours south of Seoul, is an absolutely gorgeous area. It's got mountains, it's got water. The people there, we've had a couple people go over from our crew already to just do some pre-Olympic stuff, and we've heard nothing but wonderful stories, how nice the people are, how clean everything is, how great the venues are. That it's just gorgeous. I mean, obviously North Korea is a little bit scary, but they're, for the most part, I think, knock on wood, everything will be okay. Certainly with the recent developments that North Korea and South Korea are going to combine for some teams, I would think maybe that's a good sign that we'll have a nice, peaceful Olympics, we can hope. But when, you look back to like Rio and Sochi, totally different feeling going into those games, and all about, well, should they move the games, should they cancel the games? We haven't heard that one bit coming into these Olympics, so I'm really looking forward to it for a number of reasons, that being one of them, that it's just nice to finally go somewhere where you think, this is really somewhere, a part of the world that I'd like to go and experience and check it out, and I'm looking forward to it.
Are you stoked for Olympic hockey, or is it are you a little down on it with the no NHL players going over?
I am not down on it because of no NHL players. I am excited to see. What I'm down on for me, and I think when at least when I heard that there wasn't going to be NHL players, my thought was, great, we're going to see the youth of hockey. We're going to see the future of hockey. We're going to see what it's like to see Casey Middlestat and basically most of the World Junior team, and all, basically see hockey's young guns and up-and-comers in college and what they could do. And instead, I understand why they're doing it, because you have to win. And if we all just went all American college players, we wouldn't have a chance. We may not have a chance now with some of the players, but to me, it's great. I'm happy to see Brian Giunta get a second chance and get another run at it. And it's going to be fun to see Ryan Stoa again. I haven't had a chance to see him since he played for the Gophers, but I was really hoping that it would be more like it was. It kind of captured some of the magic of the 1980 Olympics, where it was young guys we haven't heard of who are going to make a mark someday, and who this opportunity, and not to say that it doesn't for some, but that this opportunity really meant a lot for. And I just, I'm excited to watch it. I'm excited to see how it plays out. It doesn't really bother me that there's not NHLers there, but I was really hoping that we might get a chance to see young up-and-comers in the future and see what the NHL has, in 5 to 6 years from now.
Yeah, it's definitely made for some good stories. Some guys who careers are,
sure,
almost at an end, and they're getting a chance now to play in the Olympics. So,
and that's fun. That's a fun part of it. We had a chance to talk to Tony Granato, and he's like, it's exciting to reconnect with some of these guys who still have a great passion and great talent for the game, but maybe aren't playing at the NHL level. And so that's exciting. I am very much excited for the women's hockey tournament, because I think the women's team is set up to really, this really is probably their best chance in the last 20 years at a gold medal. And that's exciting. And I think this women's team is really outstanding on the U.S. side, and they should be fine. Silver to me is a letdown. I think this team is ready for gold.
Yeah, no, I would agree. When we got to see them when they were here in St. Paul last month, that they should be good to make a run at the gold.
Yeah, and it's going to be a 2-team tournament, and I think that's it. I think it comes down to Canada, and I think it comes down to the U.S. again, like it did in 2014.
Yeah, that was a great gold medal game, even though the U.S. lost. That was quite something.
It was.
On to our set questions we kind of have for all our guests on this show here. So, first question for you, Dave, is what are your general thoughts here on the Wild so far this season?
Puzzling, but cautiously optimistic. I to see where the team has played, and to see them lose to teams that they shouldn't and beat teams that they probably shouldn't. Certainly the game they played against Tampa Bay, I think, kind of caught us all off guard, that they go out and beat one of, if not the best and most loaded team in the NHL right now. I do think a lot of the injuries early in the season really hurt this team, and I think it's in hockey, especially in the Western Conference, if yes, it's an 82 game season, but if you trip out of the gate, it can hurt you, and you're always playing uphill. And this team has been playing uphill for the whole season, and they're starting to turn around. I think Coyle's really starting to play well. Zucker is playing well again. He's been here the whole season, but he went quiet for a while. It's good to have Parisi back. At some point here, hopefully they're going to get Niederreiter back, and Brodin's been playing well. I just think that the injuries really kind of messed with this team, both physically and mentally too, because there's been so many roster changes. So I think, and I hesitate to say this, but I will anyway, I think the best is yet to come for the Wild team this season. The question is can their best get them into the playoffs? And that's what I don't know, because it depends on, the rest of the conference, really.
Right, and such a logjam in the West right now for, the last 2 playoff spots, and it'll make it interesting here going into the final couple of months. Which player have you been most impressed with so far this season? Has one in particular jumped out at you, or not so much with all the injuries?
I think just because of the way his season started, and I think there's a couple, but at top of my list right now, I think is Zucker Jason Zucker's played really, really well. He went into a cold streak, and he's starting to come back around again. And Eric Stahl, gosh, the Wild have so gotten their money's worth with him when they signed him last season. He has an unbelievable year. He's really thrived so well here in Minnesota, and probably because he doesn't have to do it all himself here, like he had to do when he was with the Rangers, and that just isn't his game. His game is not an end-to-end guy. He's a great position guy. And if you can get him the puck in his face, he can do things with it. He's shown that this year. So I think those two guys have probably impressed me, and I don't want to say surprised, because I think those players are always, those two guys specifically have had the talent, but I don't think that Jason Zucker was going to be the guy that everyone thought was going to be leading the team like he was out of the gate, and I certainly don't think that the Wild anticipated getting this much production out of Eric Stahl when they signed him.
Right, and he is their all-star and their leading point scorer, and you mentioned it, the incredible value they're getting at, I think his cap hit is $3.5 million. That's quite the bargain. Then on the flip side, has there been a player you've been pretty disappointed with so far this year?
Well, gosh, there's a lot of them. I don't necessarily want to say disappointed, but I'll just call him a head scratcher, and I think that's Matt Dumba for me, because there are some games, and I think we've all seen this. There are some games where he looks like an unbelievably good offensive-minded defenseman, where he has got a great shot, he can stick handle, he can move the ice, but then there's other games where he consistently gets himself caught in too deep in the offensive zone and isn't in the right spot on the breakout. And just little things that you learn in in Pee-wees. And it's like, how can this be the same player? How can you be so incredible one game and so terribly awful the next, or in really key times when the team needs you? And I think, again, he's been a really good player at times. And there's no doubt in my mind that he is talented. But he really is the perfect, the quintessential Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde of hockey right now, at least on this team, in my mind.
And as we talked about Eric Stahl a little bit ago, do you have any good Eric Stahl stories to share, or is it haven't had that much time to interact with him yet?
We shot, and it hasn't aired yet. Hopefully it'll air some point before the end of the season. Him and Matt Cullen shot we shot a 2 in the Box segment with them. And they were really funny. It's hard to remember everything that came out of the story, but, I make up these fake questions. And the funny thing that always gets me with the 2 in the Box, and he and Matt Cullen were no exception, is that they come in laughing and it's all fun and games. But as soon as you tell these guys there's a competition, it doesn't even mean if it is for something. But as soon as you tell them there's a competition, they're all in. And it gets, and then that's when it's really funny, because they take shots at each other. And so he was really great. He and Cullen were really, really funny. 2 old vets who have, been around this league for a long time. And, they kept referring to him as elder statesmen, and they thought that was an apt description of them. So they really cracked me up. They got the bit and had some fun. And I don't know when it's airing, but hopefully at some point, if not during February, certainly during early March.
And then last question here for Dave Schwartz. If you could make one change to the NHL All-Star Game, if you were given the power of the NHL Commissioner's Office and they let you make a change to the All-Star Game, what would you change?
I'd move it outdoors and move it to Minnesota. Take that. Because I'm so tired of other states and the East Coast getting the Winter Classic. I want the game outside, and I want it in Minnesota. People always say, it's like, well, why do you even play the game? And what is the format this year? Is it 3-on-3 this year? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
They change it so much. So
3-on-3,
which
and
I think
the divisions play each other.
Yeah, so I like that. I don't really have a problem with that. The skills competition is, I think, at least for me, I like the skills competition more than I like the actual game, because you don't get a chance to see really, and I mean this in the best way possible, what freak shows these guys are. I mean, their skills are unbelievable, and they're so strong, and they're so fast, and they have such good hands, and they're so agile, and sometimes you don't see that from guys. But Like when I was a kid, I remember watching the game and being, wowed when Al Iafrate had a 102 mile an hour slap shot. Like that's way back. But like to me, that's awesome. Watching Zdeno Chara when he would take a slap shot, or watching, whoever the fastest guy would be in the NHL right now fly around the rink in the times that they do it. So I guess aside from moving it outside and bringing it to Minnesota, I would. And the other thing is, like, that's the perfect. Okay, I'm going to go on here. I think that's the perfect way to make that outdoor game, right? Because then you can't complain that it's every point counts in the NHL, right? You can miss the postseason by 1 point. What if it's the 1 point that you lost at the outdoor game because the ice conditions weren't good, because it was too warm, or the sun was too bright, or something like that, So instead, make the All-Star game outside. It's a 3-on-3 competition, and it's great. And then it's the best of both worlds. You get everything all in one. So if I'm Commissioner Gary Bettman, besides I would give Minnesota the Winter Classic and the All-Star game, and we play them all outside.
No, I would very much like to see them move it outside, and as you said, it would be nice to get it away from Boston, Pittsburgh, or Chicago every year. So.
In New York for once, and I'm a New Yorker saying that, but I live in Minnesota now, so I want it here. It's time.
Yeah, no, Dave. Anything you wanted to plug before we let you go here?
You know what? I'll plug our Olympic coverage. I will tell you to please make sure you tune into KARE 11 at 5, 6, and 10 every night, and in the morning show as well. I'll be live all over the place. It'll be 15 hours ahead over there, so it'll be kind of weird. But we'll have, if you love Olympics and you love hockey, we're going to have the best coverage. I can guarantee you that. So please tune in and watch and interact with me on social media. It's a lot of fun for me. I'll try to not just give you stuff on television, but give you stuff on social too, that give you the experience. Hopefully you can't get anywhere else.
Winter Olympics always my personal favorite out of the two Olympics, and
mine too, absolutely.
Curling is very much my favorite sport behind hockey of the Winter Olympics.
It's awesome, isn't it? Isn't it so much? And they, at the international level, they get into it so much. I mean, it's a raucous atmosphere when you go into curling in the international venues, and it'll be nuts again too. I'm sure it's great. I enjoy the heck out of covering curling.
Yep, it's definitely fun, and we will watch that on the NBC family of networks, and then we will watch Dave Schwartz recap it all on KARE 11. Dave, thank you so much for jumping on with us, and we'll have you back on again soon.
My pleasure, guys. I appreciate it. It's always fun. We didn't even talk about jerseys this time.
Ooh, next time we'll get heavy on the jersey talk. All right, thanks, Dave.
Yep.
That's still black ice. This is our pond.
You're goddamn right. That's right.
Phoebe's right. We got to take it to these guys.
Yeah. Take it to them, guys.
110%, guys.
We'll take it.
Heads up.
Closing out the Giles and the Goalie podcast All-Star show is one of our favorite guests. He perhaps turned the tide on this otherwise fine podcast last January when he gave us an Ilya Bryzgalov story that we will certainly never forget. He is the one and only Chad Graff. Chad, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing all right. Staying dry, unburied from all the snow this week, I hope.
Unburied from the snow, and so far unsurrounded by a ton of Eagles fans, so no complaints here.
Ooh, not sure about the Eagles fans, but anyway. So, Chad, it has been a while since we've caught up with you. Have you been able to keep up with the Wild so far this year?
I have. Probably not as much as I would like or as much as I'm used to, but I'll probably catch most of maybe every other game and stay in tune to what's going on with the team.
With that said, our first question here for you is, as the Wild are at the NHL All-Star break and scrapping and clawing their way just to stay in the playoff picture, what are your general thoughts on the Wild here this season?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think for as well as they've played in the last month, and especially as well as they've played at home, it's pretty remarkable to think that they're still on the outside looking in terms of the playoff picture in the Western Conference. And that's considering, or I guess mainly because of how good the Central is. And we always knew, that's something that goes back 5 years, even during the realignment. I remember, owner Craig Leopold saying something like, we know that this may not be the best for us in the short term, but it's something we're going to have to deal with it. So I think that they still have a decent chance. What is amazing to me about the Central, just to start, is Nashville has had no hangover from their run last year. B, that Winnipeg has just taken off and become this remarkable team, a team that's 17-3-1, at least on this Thursday at home. And maybe more than all of that, the fact that the Colorado Avalanche, this dismal team with so many underachievers, is actually, I guess, and this kind of feels weird to say, but a good team. I'm still not entirely sure what's gotten into them. Everybody I talk to, that even remotely knows the NHL, I say, these guys can't be for real, can they? But everybody seems to say that, they sure can. Their goal differential is +20. They obviously had the 10-game win streak. So it's certainly not going to be easy for the Wild, who, aside from the teams I mentioned, also are trailing St. Louis, which now is starting healthy as Jaden Schwartz comes back. They're still trailing Dallas, which obviously has all the offensive firepower in the world. And then they're still going to have to contend with the Los Angeles Kings and the Anaheim Ducks trying to make a charge. So it's going to be very tough for the Wild. I think their playoff chances are definitely not better than 50-50, but at the same time, despite everybody telling me that the Colorado Avalanche are legit, my eyes maybe still are a little bit fixated on the Avalanche of the last couple of years. And so for now, I think that the Wild get in as the last playoff wildcard team ahead of the Colorado Avalanche. That's my prediction here at the end of June, or at the end of January.
Yeah, it's so weird you mentioned the Avalanche. I heard the other day that they're on pace for one of the best point differential turnarounds in the history of the NHL, and you think last year they had 40 some odd points, and now here they are. They've already eclipsed that here, and they dusted the Wild pretty good a few weeks ago, and they look like a totally different animal despite the fact they really only swapped out one or two players.
They won 22 games last year. They won 22 of 82 games. They had a goal differential of -112. I mean, yes, is it impressive, the turnaround and the fact that they could go down as one of the biggest flips? Sure, but to do that, you've got to start at a really low place. And they set the bar about as low as you could possibly go. I still don't understand how they had a -112 goal differential.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does help when you let your head coach have an entire off season, not 90 minutes to prepare for a regular season.
There is that, yeah.
Next question for you, Chad. What Wild player have you been most impressed with so far this season?
Probably Eric Stahl. I think it's probably the easy answer, considering that he's got the most points and he's tied for the lead in goals. But just the fact that he's still doing this at 33 years old, and when he signed that 3-year free agent deal with the Wild a couple years ago, I think a lot of people said, all right, we can see how this is a smart move in the short term. It gives the Wild a top 6 center that they've been lacking. But I think the concern with a lot of people is, what's he going to look like in 2018? There were concerns when he signed with the Wild that he was already starting to slow down. And now here in his second season with the Wild, that has not happened. He's got 19 goals, 22 assists, and really he's been a model of consistency on an otherwise inconsistent team. Jason Zucker's played well, but has had a lot of inconsistencies. Charlie Coyle has had probably more inconsistencies than anybody, or even, not inconsistencies, but just consistently not scoring and not producing the way that people hoped. Nino Niederreiter obviously struggling with some injuries. Matt Dumba's gotten better since the slow start. Granlund, I think, is a positive, continuing to build and not far off a point per game clip. But all of that said, and still going down that line, I think Eric Stahl has been the most impressive part of the Wild, just because of what people feared his second and third seasons with the Wild might be. But here he is, still chugging along.
And then on the flip side of that, which Wild player has the most disappointed you this season? You tossed out, Charlie Coyle or, maybe even Matt Dumba early on in the season.
Yeah, I think I still give Coyle the nod barely over Tyler Ennis. I think it's got to come down probably to one of those two. Ennis, because after the trade, everybody says, watch out. If this guy can stay healthy, he can be electric. All he's been lacking is health. But we're 48 games in. He's played 46 of them. He's had the health. And even a couple of those are just because he was a healthy scratch. It's not even like he's had some big injuries. And yet the production really isn't there. His shooting percentage is lower than his career percentage, so I think he'd be due for an uptick before too long. But 6 goals, 7 assists, a -5 rating is not going to get it done for a guy that you acquire after giving up Pominville and Scandella, and I think really was the X factor of that trade. I think you kind of know what you're going to get from Foligno. He's not going to be a major offensive contributor, but you also hope that he's not going to be a reliable or unliable in his zone, and you think he's going to give some hits. But Ennis, I just think there was a lot more expected of him, and yet, given all that, I still think that Charlie Coyle has probably been the bigger disappointment. Obviously, it was a tough break for him, literally after his foot breaks a couple of games into the season. But he came back, and I think he played pretty well his first 5 or 6 games, and since then there hasn't been a whole lot. The fact that he's got 4 goals in 32 games is pretty worrisome for me, coupled with the fact that in a lot of games you just almost don't see him. He had 21 shifts last game, the January 22nd game against Ottawa Senators, and didn't have a single shot on goal. So what he's done, I think, is definitely a little bit worrisome.
So I've heard that Coyle is perhaps his biggest critic, and maybe to a fault. Is that definitely a thing? And 2, do you think that's really factoring into his prolonged slump here?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of even going back to covering his first couple seasons in the league, that was definitely his reputation or how people knew of him, just because when he would get in a funk, he would be in it for so long. And when he's not in a funk, when he's playing well, it almost makes you, the comparison that I think a lot of people used with him when he was playing well or when he'd go through those spurts was that he almost looked like David Backes. He could be physical, he's a bigger guy, but he also had some offensive upside. And that, he's not getting any younger. He's already 25 years old. He's been in the league for 5 seasons. So now the concern is that this is just going to be who he is and that he's going to have these inconsistencies. It's definitely fair to say that he's very tough on himself. A lot of players are. And I think Coyle maybe gets that reputation more than others because he'll be more open and vocal about his frustrations. But it definitely seems to weigh on him more than it should or more than most. I even remember going all the way back a couple coaches now to Mike Yeo, even before Torchetti or Boudreau, and Mike Yeo having some of the same thoughts about Charlie Coyle, just that if you could get him to harness and really believe but also play with a bit of a mean streak, he could be a really good player. But when he's out of it, he just seems really far out of it.
You mentioned Eric Stahl, Minnesota's all-star representative this weekend. We just sit here and we see his contract at 3 years, $10.5 million. So that's a $3.5 million cap hit annually. You look around the league, is there a better contract in the NHL than Eric Stahl's? I mean, outside of Connor McDavid winning the Hart Trophy on his entry-level deal.
Right. That wasn't a bad contract right there. That's for sure. Boy, I don't know. That's a pretty good deal. And the nice thing about that, like Chuck Fletcher, I think that was a point of showing he had learned from his mistakes, because between the Thomas Vanek deal and just some of the others, he had made a little bit too much of a penchant to, just because a guy was willing to come to you, to giving them a long-term deal when they were north of 28 years old when they didn't need to. So I think the Eric Stahl one was not just a good deal because the number fit with what they were trying to do, but mainly because if it didn't work out, it was only a 3-year deal, and that you could get out of it relatively easy. So all in all, I got to think that's one of Chuck Fletcher's best deals that he's made. And it's proving it's rare that you get a 33-year-old who's on one of the better contract values in the NHL. Usually by that point, you're talking about like Brent Seabrook's massive number with, I think, like 6 years to go as he's being contemplated for a healthy scratch. And yet Eric Stahl is a 33-year-old All-Star on a relatively affordable deal. So plenty of things to knock Chuck Fletcher for, but that one is certainly not one of them.
And I think the other thing people forget about Eric Stahl was that, in Game 5 of the playoffs last year, he suffered a pretty major concussion. And, we found out it took him, quite a while of the offseason to recover from that. And he's really done well for himself this year and has really had no symptoms from that. So that is another huge bonus for the Wild there.
Sure, and no, short thing to discuss how difficult it must be to come back from a concussion, especially one that frightening and that scary. Just from talking to players who have been in that situation before about how difficult it is, and all concussions, may last different or act differently, but it's got to be terrifying the first couple times that you get back into it. Keith Ballard mentioned that, ended up retiring. Amanda Kessel has talked about how tough it was for her for 2 years having those symptoms, so definitely not an easy thing to go through, and he's just a pro's pro, Eric Stahl, and continues chugging along.
And the last question for Chad Graff here on the Giles and the Goalie podcast All-Star Show is, as it is NHL All-Star Weekend, Chad, if you could make one change to the NHL All-Star Game, if they said, Chad, you are commissioner of the NHL and are allowed to make one change to this event, what would you make?
Well, I think you kind of have two routes if you're Gary Bettman's successor with one item that you're allowed to change, his short-term successor. I think you either do one of two things. You either embrace the silliness of an all-star game and the silliness of that 5-on-5, a 3-on-3 event, and you almost turn it into a skills competition. You've got your 3-on-3 for a while, then you can score bonus points with a shootout round or the hardest slap shot. You almost incorporate that and do that differently. Or you make it a little more conventional, and I think it'd be fun to see a Western versus Eastern 3-on-3 game. Like, if you want to extend the bench a little bit so that you still get and then that, I think it makes it a little bit easier to pick their best player and not just like in years past where the Wild have seemingly needed to send a defenseman because there were so many good forwards in the Central Division that it would have been hard to name one of the Wild's forwards an all-star, even if they may have deserved it. So I think that would address that, but also I don't know exactly how you do it. You might have to do 2 periods or something to that effect, but I think it'd be cool to see people from different divisions. I think it'd be cool to see Burns playing with Wild teammates again, or just a different combination that you can make. I do like the current format, but I'd also like to see Western versus Eastern.
All right. Before we let you go, Chad, is there any kind of major life news you would like to plug on our podcast?
Sure. There happens to be. Funny you should ask. After almost 5 awesome years at the St. Paul Pioneer Press, where I covered the Wild and then a bit of everything, I recently made a change, and on Friday, just a day or two ago, depending on when this comes out, on Friday I started a new job working for The Athletic, the company that Michael Russo works for, that John Krasinski works for, that a number of the best hockey writers in North America work for. So I'm super excited to get started. It was a hard decision to leave the Pioneer Press, but now I can't wait to get going with some of the best teammates around.
Definitely, we're excited for you to join The Athletic. If you don't have the Athletic subscription yet, even I would encourage you to do that. You would definitely get a lot of bang for your buck just on hockey coverage alone. And Chad, we will look forward to seeing your work there, and we will definitely check in with you again down the road here.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Good talking with you guys.
Well, there it was. All 5 guests. We hope you enjoyed that, and obviously Chad recorded that, his Athletic move before he put that out on Twitter, so I had to keep that in under lock and key per his request. Actually, no, he didn't say that. As he said, it was the worst kept secret. As
like when Russo did it?
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But no, congrats to Chad on his big move. And thanks to Chad for joining us. It was, as he talked to me beforehand, it's been a crazy couple of weeks for him. So I'm appreciative of him jumping on with us for a little bit here on the show. And to all our guests for joining us on this otherwise fine all-star production. Ben,
just to be clear, Giles and I are not joining The Athletic.
Not yet.
No.
When they start rolling out podcasts, they'll have to give us a call.
Yeah. Or when they get into the realm of jerseys.
I'm totally going to put in cricket noises after I said they'll totally give us a call. But, yeah, this was certainly a fun podcast to produce. It obviously took all week, as you kind of hear, as I mentioned to everyone, we're recording on this day and this day and this day. But it was great to have everyone join. We hope you enjoyed this version of the All-Star podcast this year, as it was a fine-tuned production of our Twins Daily Winter Meltdown, which you and I got to enjoy last weekend, just as guests, no podcast.
Yes, and we got well lubricated for that.
Yes. As you can see on our fine YouTube channel from our post-game video, we are well lit. And I took a screenshot because I stopped it, like it auto-plays on the YouTube channel. So I stopped it at 1 second, and the expression on our faces as we opened that video says it all. So I have it screenshotted and saved for eternity.
Good.
So yeah, no, that will do it for this podcast. Again, we hope you enjoyed. Ben and I will be back in a more regular manner next week as we open up the podcast to the Burnsville studios. I know Ben is very excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
You can find our otherwise fine podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud. We do have a YouTube channel. You can find it on a plethora of other platforms. We have a Facebook at GatG Wild Podcast, same for a Twitter and an Instagram. And Ben and I are on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell, and we write for a website called zonecoverage.com, as we no doubt let off the show with. So look for our written works there. And yeah, that will do it for us, and we will catch you next week.
Later.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.